Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am delighted to introduce my guests today, Gaurav, Bhatnagar, and Mark Minukas. Gaurav Bhatnagar is the founder of Co-Creation Partners and has dedicated more than 2 decades to helping companies thrive and achieve breakthrough performance. Since founding Co-Creation Partners in 2010, he has designed and led programs and workshops for private, public, and social sector clients across multiple industries, including financial services, basic materials, manufacturing, healthcare, and technology. Prior to founding Co-Creation Partners, he was a consultant with McKinsey and Company, most recently as a leader in their organization practice in North America. Before McKinsey, he worked in marketing for Pepsi-Cola International and Procter & Gamble in Europe, the Middle East, and India. Mark Minukas has been helping organizations transform their business performance for over 15 years now. His work has taken him around the world and allowed him to explore all kinds of industries: manufacturing, technology, travel and logistics, government, and financial services. While he marvels at the uniqueness and special nature of each company and industry, he's also discovered that human beings at the core of any organization. How people show up, communicate, problem solve, and lead, and how they lead determines how large the gap is between strategy and execution. Given this, he advises, consults, and coaches senior leaders and their teams on how they can design effective improvement programs and harness the talent and creativity of their people to achieve significantly better results. Please join me in welcoming both partners in Co-Creation Partners, Mark Minukas and Gaurav Bhatnagar. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Tammy. Such a pleasure.
Thanks, Tammy. Great to be here.
Really happy to have you. So let's start with you, Gaurav. So Gaurav, tell us a little bit about your earlier years. On Work from the Inside Out, we like to talk about where we began and some of those formative years and how they might have influenced where we are today.
Yeah, let me give you one which is from when I was an undergraduate. And my brother, who had just graduated from undergrad and gone to the US, was well known to be the best debater in town. And I was desperate to prove that I could make it. And I remember I was like so determined, but every time I went to debate, I would lose. In fact, I lost the first 13 debates that I competed in. And it was super frustrating, but it also was a drive that I had to figure my way out. And the 14th one I won, and then I did not lose a single one in my 3 years of undergrad, which is what we used to do in India. And you know, it created a story for me, which is the inside out conversation, which was that I never have it easy, but if I just stick with it, I will always get it in the end. And what's interesting in that is that story both served me, but it also significantly held me back. And it served me because it helped me achieve. And at the same time, it held me back because I created a story that life was difficult. And therefore, I always found difficulty in everything. So that's an early life story that might be interesting.
Well, so that is interesting. So when did you realize that lesson, though?
Oh, that was much later. That was when I was 31 and I was in South Africa. And, the office in South Africa, this was in McKinsey, was not doing too well. And there was this lady called Geeta Bellin who came in to work with us to improve our performance. And she helped us do a lot of personal work. And a core of that work was around beliefs. And the more we studied those beliefs, the more I realized how I was making it hard for myself. But it took me another, 12, 14 years after undergrad to get to that point. And quite honestly, I was burning myself out. I was creating a pretty dysfunctional personal life because of that. And that led to a breakthrough, which was my second big breakthrough for myself, and has been at the starting point of this journey.
The second big breakthrough, where did that take you?
That led me to a wonderful place where it helped me connect with my joy.
Mm.
And it helped me understand that you can be joylessly successful or successfully joyful. And I chose to be successfully joyful, which meant that I approached life with much more ease. And that's at the core of everything I do, which is to connect with my purpose and to work from a place of joy and ease.
Oh boy. I love that expression. I love both expressions, actually. Joylessly successful. I think I know a lot of people like that. And successfully joyful. Those are great. So what does successfully joyful look like for you?
So successfully joyful for me has a few elements to it. The first one is waking up every day and focusing and working on something that is truly and deeply my purpose and my passion. So the primary focus is not money or success. The primary focus is to work and focus on my passion. The second one is to not take myself too seriously and work from a place of ease. And the third one is not to hold success and purpose in contradiction. Often we hold those two in contradiction, and that creates a lot of stress and chaos. And for me, it's a very important piece that purpose and success are not in contradiction.
And can you say a little more about your purpose, living in your purpose? How would you characterize your purpose for our audience? What would you tell them your purpose is?
Yeah, so my purpose, and Mark often rolls his eyes when I say this, is my purpose is to transform all of humanity and help human beings connect with their infinite potential.
That's a big agenda.
Big agenda.
I can see why Mark he didn't just roll his eyes right now. I can tell you that, but he's probably doing it in his mind. But how might that play out on a day-to-day basis? So for example, the kind of work that you're doing today, or let's go back a couple of steps. So you worked for McKinsey in South Africa. You left McKinsey. What were you doing after that? That was consulting work. What kind of work did you do from there? And what did it look like in more concrete terms? Because I feel like I understand what you're talking about. I want to make sure that our audience has a grounding in what you're talking about. So what did that look like going forward? How did you arrive at that point and establish that sense of purpose?
Yeah, so the work that Mark and I do, and I have been doing, whether it was in McKinsey, and I left South Africa and came back to New York with McKinsey and continue to do this. My work is about helping organizations deliver performance by building a culture where people can show up in a way that they can bring their whole selves to work, right? What does that mean? When a team is being, for example, the team, there's no conversation going on, or people are judging each other. A lot of that judgment is based in a story that people have about themselves and about other people, about what they are saying about them or what I believe about myself. And those stories prevent me from having powerful conversations that allow me to speak in a way that allows for the difficult conversation to lead to more interesting outcomes.
Right.
So the work becomes about how do you get people to shift what is going on inside their head, but then how to learn how to communicate from a place of confidence with other people so you can engage in difficult conversations powerfully
Right.
to help people shift the narrative.
Right.
And finally, it is for one of the big ideas in my work is more important than the strategy of an organization is the thinking that leads to that strategy. So if I shift the way you think, now I help you create a new strategy. So often people think strategy is about writing something on a piece of paper. Our work is about helping people think differently about their choices, which leads to different outcomes. So
Right.
ultimately, it's always about performance, but it's performance from a place of abundance, from a place of completeness rather than a place of limitation and stuckness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what I did at McKinsey, and that's what we did when I started co-creation in 2010, and that's what we've been doing for the last 11 years, which then many people say is basically at the core of what is a learning organization. So we help organizations become learning organizations
Right.
by going on what is an inside-out journey, which is what your work is.
Absolutely. I like the sound of that for sure. And okay, well, let's turn over to Mark for a moment and hear his story, and then we'll talk about how the two of you came together and wrote this amazing book. I could talk to the both of you probably for a long time. I can tell there's just a lot of synergy here. So, Mark, take us back to some of your earlier years and where were your beginnings and how were they formative in shaping where you are today?
I had a very, supportive family, but one dynamic I had in my family was I had a younger brother. He was only a year and a half younger than me, but he was physically bigger than me.
Oh.
And people thought he was the older brother and he was better at sports and things like that. So that really, created this competitive fire in me.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I had to win in order to be enough. If I wasn't winning, I wasn't enough. And so that was a story that I held with me for most of my life. Now, in some ways, it drove me to try really hard at things. So I poured myself into golf. As a skinny guy who was somewhat athletic, that was a sport I could excel in. So I did well in golf. I got a scholarship to go to college, so that served me well. But at the same time, it was also very hot-tempered, and if I wasn't winning, I was really extremely hard on myself. So I was I had a crisis of confidence, you could call it. And I poured myself into school as well when I got into college. If I was getting good grades, I felt good about myself. If I wasn't, then I felt really bad about myself. And so again,
it was like an all or nothing kind of thing, right? It was
all or nothing,
right? Yeah,
it was all or nothing. So that was a story, and I was so blind to that story. I just felt like that's the way it is, right? If you're winning, people love you and they include you and they embrace you. If you're not winning, you're not enough. And so it was completely driven by the outside world about whether or not I felt like I was enough and worthy of love and respect. And that drove me, I was an officer in the Navy, and, I can reflect back on some of the silly things I did, as a leader, some of the mistakes I made. And it was often based on, what I would consider now looking back, maybe a fragile ego, me feeling like I had to win over people and win arguments in order to be effective as a leader rather than really embracing, the insights and wisdom of people around me. So that was, one place. It wasn't serving me. From the Navy, I went to McKinsey and Company, where, they attract these insecure overachievers. So I fit the bill. And I was looking for McKinsey and, the brand name of McKinsey and the roles at McKinsey to be those external validators. And, for a while, I think it served me, but it also was a real source of dissatisfaction and unhappiness in my life. And I've since, realized and have started to unpack, why this is not so great. And I think there is a place you can be and stand where you can do your best and try really hard and try to do well. And yet the outcome doesn't determine who you are, doesn't determine whether or not you're enough. You do it from a place of being enough rather than the results dictating whether or not you are.
Yeah. I like the way you frame that. you know, these definitions of what's enough. And you probably didn't even know what enough was. It's interesting, Mark. When did you go into the Navy? Was that as an offshoot of your college education, or how did that happen? And what was your motivation for doing? Was that also part of that kind of, you know, competitive or shooting for something higher for yourself, or what was your thought about that?
I think so. I went to the Naval Academy, which is, you know, basically a training ground for being in the Navy. So,
that was your undergrad.
As an officer. Undergrad was at the Naval Academy. Yeah. So I got commissioned coming out of the Naval Academy. But at 17 years old, I chose to go to the Naval Academy, which was unheard of in the small town in Rocky Hill, or small town in Connecticut, by the name of Rocky Hill, where I grew up. You know, nobody did that, and very few people actually went into the military. So people thought I was crazy. But I think it does go back to that competitive drive. I was trying to do something different. You know, I was trying to stand out in a way. And again, you know, I think there's good elements to that, and there's also some dysfunctional elements to that.
Were you discharged from the Navy when you went to McKinsey, or was there a reservist kind of relationship, or how did that transition happen for you, Mark?
Yeah, so I pretty much got out once my initial commitment was up, and it was actually a really hard choice. You know, it's something I really wrestled with, but I was sort of driven by this desire to make a difference, and I just felt like there's something outside of the military that would allow me to perhaps have a bigger impact in a way that I felt, in a way that I felt like I could uniquely contribute to. So that's how I thought about it. So I didn't stick with that, but I did fulfill the initial commitment. In the military.
And how long were you with McKinsey?
I was at McKinsey & Company for 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had a good long time to get to become unhappy there, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it was always a mixed bag.
It was.
First few years I loved, I joined right out of the military without a business degree. I joined as a business analyst. So it was an interesting transition to go from the Navy, where I was, leading units, and forward deployed units. And then I was at McKinsey & Company, in charge of a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint presentation. And, people are freaking out, pulling their hair out, saying, why isn't this done? And I was like, why is everyone so stressed out about this stuff? Because, right. It's not the same as
it's not life
different.
And death, right?
Yeah, it's not life and death. Exactly. But the level of stress, that was a really interesting insight. The level of stress that people brought to, non-life threatening situations was a bit jarring, but eventually I kind of probably was assimilated into the McKinsey culture. I stayed there for 8 years.
Yeah.
But my first 3 years, as a business analyst and an early associate were so much fun. I felt like I was learning all this new stuff. And, it was a great learning experience. And then it got a little bit political, and, I certainly had some ups and downs from there. And again, it gets back to this competitive drive. If I wasn't winning, if I wasn't doing better than other people, which is really hard to do sometimes at McKinsey, they sort you and rank you and evaluate you pretty stringently. There were some times where my confidence was really shaken, and it definitely was tough at times.
Yeah.
Towards the end. Yeah.
So by the time that you did leave McKinsey, what were the conclusions you were coming to, or what kind of shape were you in then, Mark?
I was probably quite determined, but I probably had a crisis of confidence. I think when I decided to leave McKinsey, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with my life.
Oh, okay. So you were kind of at a crossroads then.
I was at a total crossroads, didn't know what I wanted to do. I did feel burnout.
You did?
My wife and I were also newly married, and we just had our first child. So I was wanting to get off the road and just shift gears and focus on family, but I didn't really know what my purpose was. And I felt perhaps a little bit lost. And I tried a variety of different things. I had a little tech startup I participated in. It was a health and fitness analytics startup. We made some interesting progress, but that became a failure. But in some ways that was a great experience, because I found like, wow, I can fail and like, I'm okay. Like It's okay to fail. It's okay to try and to fail. And it's, it's not the end of the world.
That was a new experience for you.
It was a new experience to fail and not feel like my whole career was going to, completely, collapse. It was a feather in my cap. So I started to see, failure and trying things, even if they don't work out perfectly, as being a good thing.
Yeah.
And so I eventually, after that, got back into consulting and was working at a really difficult client. I was doing some more operational things, and the culture at this organization was highly toxic, and it was completely out of my league to address this culture at that point in time. And I knew just the guy to call, and I called up Gaurav, and we started collaborating on that client, and we've been working together ever since.
Wow. So once the startup failed, you went back into a larger consulting firm type of environment, or?
No, I decided to work more as an independent. So I was just getting gigs, myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And another
you
thread
took on
for
your
my
own
life.
client. I see. So you were going the sort of more entrepreneurial route. So,
exactly.
and then you already knew Gaurav at that point.
Yes. So Gaurav and I met. I was still at McKinsey and Company. I was running a big operational transformation at a client, and he had recently left McKinsey to start Co-Creation Partners, and he was doing the mindset work and the culture work at the same client.
Oh, so you were both working at the same client, and you already knew each other.
Well, you should listen to this story because the way Mark tells it, it's an interesting story.
Okay. Well, Mark, tell the story.
Yeah. So one day, I was at McKinsey, and we're, so proud of the work we do, but our client comes into this meeting one day and said, "Hey, I know you guys are doing the operational stuff, but we decided to bring in this other firm, Co-Creation Partners, this guy, Gaurav, to do the mindset work." And I was quite frustrated about that. I thought we did, pretty good at the mindset stuff. And, there were some workshops that were getting scheduled in the weeks ahead. So, first I was very skeptical. I'm like, who's this guy, this joker who couldn't hack it at McKinsey, and clearly got managed out, and, he had to go and start his own firm, couldn't do it at McKinsey. So highly skeptical, wondering what the heck this stuff is. And it was like this woo-woo mindset stuff, people were talking about. But I decided to go to the workshop just to check in on Gaurav and make sure he wasn't going to mess up my great transformation here.
Yeah.
And it was tremendously insightful. It was really, really good stuff. And I got a lot of insights about myself, and that competitive story that I had, and all the things that I've been struggling with or had been struggling with. And it was also this missing piece of, this puzzle. Another thing that I was dissatisfied with in my work with McKinsey was how sustainable the work was with our clients. I would come back to clients after 6 or 12 months and realize that things just weren't sustained. And I felt like there was some missing piece of this puzzle. We would talk about mindsets, but we wouldn't really get to the heart of what was going on and really create sustainable change. And so in the work that Gaurav was doing, I saw the missing piece of this puzzle that we had. So we kept in touch over the years, and it's been, like I said, a great collaboration.
So there you were, sort of skeptical, and in one workshop, you were transformed.
I was convinced. I don't know if I was transformed after,
but you were convinced that he had something to offer that was valuable.
Yeah,
which is, I think,
good job.
Gaurav is flexing his muscles right now. But I mean, that's pretty interesting, because at least the way you are describing yourself at that point, you were still kind of, you had a pretty strong ego going on, and to have Gaurav come in with your skepticism, I could see where your ego could have been strong enough to just not even really want to hear what he had to say, but you were open enough to attend his workshop, and then to actually listen to what he had to say. That's I think that's a big deal. And to walk out of there thinking, this guy he's got something going on here.
Gaurav and our whole team actually has this tremendous skill of, getting people to step back and reflect on their own life and their own mindsets and their own beliefs, right? It's not imposed, but it's really, there's a a real skill in creating the space, the safe
Yes.
space for people to turn inward.
Yeah. Wow. So that sounds like that was a bit of a turning point for you right there, even before you left McKinsey, right?
It was actually, it was a turning point. And I, from that point, I was trying to bring more of that work into, the operational work that I was doing at McKinsey. It wasn't really being embraced by the larger system.
Yeah.
I found it exhausting to try to make that happen. And so that probably contributed to my lack of excitement for, staying there at some point.
Sure. So then it sounds like maybe a few years later, was it that long that the two of you came together and decided to actually, sounds like, make it official and work together?
We dated for a while and then
dated for a while. You were courting, right? And so now how long has it been since the two of you have now worked together at Co-Creation?
I think official has probably been about 4.5 years, but we started collaborating 7 years ago. So we did go through a dating period where we're trying to really feel each other out and make sure that there was a really, really good fit there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fair. Sure. I just want to also mention, Mark, that you're an engineer by training. You have an engineering background.
I know. Don't hold against me.
No, I don't. I think I always find it interesting, actually. I know a lot of engineers who have gone in another direction. And I always find it interesting to have that background layered on top of going in a direction of trying to help people work together better, to go more to the people side of things. I think it actually can be very helpful especially when you go into an environment where there is a lot of technology or you're working with a lot of other engineers. I think it gives you credibility. And I think there are a lot of environments out there where people are really relying very heavily on technology. And if you can make yourself relatable in that way, I think it actually can bridge some gaps. How did you start the conversation about coming together? I mean, it sounds like you started doing some projects together and it just started to make more sense, right? Gaurav, were you pretty much were you working alone, or did you have a team with you already at Co-Creation Partners?
So, Tammy, I did have a team. It was a team that was pretty much focused in large part around personal transformation and personal transformation within the context of teams. So then there was a group of about 6 of us that was there. What Mark brought in, which was unique and really important, was systems thinking.
Yes.
Right? Which was missing in my practice.
Oh, okay.
And then Mark is really very good about creating discipline around systems and around how, there's 2 parts to everything. There's a being part and a doing part. I think my strength in large part has been helping people shift their being.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you make it solid and real in terms of doing is what Mark brought in. And therefore it was a perfect match, because true learning organizations be and do different, not just either do or be.
Right. So when you say systems thinking, are you referring to things like Peter Senge's work?
That as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so systems thinking in terms of Senge's thinking, systems thinking, but also in terms of process designs and all of that stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think people need that translation, or certain, some people just are more concrete thinkers, right? So I'm curious, Mark. So Gaurav was talking about his purpose, his passion, and helping people to think differently about their choices. Now that you've been in this now for, a solid number of years, would you say that you know your purpose now?
I'm much clearer on, working with organizations to help them achieve both performance and human well-being, and helping them not see that as a trade-off, but doing both together at the same time. And I think organizations are becoming more and more important in the grand scheme of the world and society. If you think of, most of the challenges or issues we face, whether it's social, political, environmental, organizations play a large part in that. I mean, governments are still important, but how organizations perform and how they foster or don't foster human well-being, both within their boundaries and outside, is a big issue. And that's, my mission is to help organizations achieve that both and.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what we describe in our book, Unfear, is, how organizations can shift from fear to unfear. So, my mission is to unfear organizations around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the full title of the book is Unfear: Transform Your Organization to Create Breakthrough Performance and Employee Wellbeing. And I think that I love the cover of the book, by the way. I recommend anybody look up the cover. It's a great cover. I'm always looking at book covers these days. But it's a beautifully crafted book too, because it really, it goes through a number of different ways to look at fear and unfear in a number of different levels, I'd say. It looks at the biology of fear and unfear. It looks at it from an individual level, from a team level, from an organizational level. So it outlines the 8 fear archetypes. It gives you a number of different ways, vantage points to look at it and to develop understanding from the point of view of a leader or from the point of view of an employee. Although I think everyone's a leader in one way or another, right? But I think it helps to provide frameworks for understanding, right? And I think that's the beauty of the way that the book is organized. And it builds a whole lot of understanding, because I find that the word fear in and of itself just connotates so many different things for people. And so to provide the framework or the mindset of unfear, I think gives people something that they can actually step into and try on and try it in a number of different contexts, right?
Wow, you should, Tammy, you should be a publicist. I love it. Thank you.
I don't know if your publicist would appreciate that.
No, but I think, Tammy, that's so what you're saying is so important, because one of the big assertions we're making in the book is the emotion of fear is not what the important thing is. It's just an emotion. It's your relationship to that emotion where everything lies, right? And that's at the crux of the whole book, because we have these 2 superpowers, the power of imagination and the power of language, which craft for us our future. And if we can imagine our relationship with fear is something which is bad and needs protection against, we show up in a certain way, but we imagine it differently as an opportunity for learning, which is what the unfear is.
That's
suddenly it gives you a whole new avenue.
Really, in a way, to me, unfear, the way you present it, it's really you're partnering with fear. You're partnering with it, and you're using it as a signal, as a sign for making decisions, making choices, and giving yourself a chance to reflect and think about the choices that you're making, or opening up your thinking, opening up your curiosity, right? How long did it take you to conceive and put this book together? It just looks like it just looks so original to me. It's not your typical book that offers people a new way of thinking. And it is a new way of thinking for a lot of people.
Yeah, we wanted to write it as a business philosophy book, less as a how-to.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear it's, you're sort of picking it up in that way, Tammy. But I'll sort of turn it over to Gaurav, because I think you've probably been marinating on the idea for this book a little bit longer than I have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so 20 years in the making, 20 years of marinating, 20 years of experimenting on myself, 20 years of falling flat on my face, experiments with organizations, beautiful learning opportunities.
Yeah.
Ultimately started getting serious about the book, I think Mark and I, about 2 years ago, which meant that we had to go write a proposal, which took longer than actually writing the book. And then once we got McGraw-Hill to say yes, as Mark said, I think because of the pandemic, we were able to focus and do it in 6 months.
Yeah.
But it wasn't easy. Tammy, Mark and I may have, if it wasn't for the pandemic, if we were in person. Fortunately, you can't put your hand through the screen to kill the other person. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So I think it's been really helpful because it's helped us come up with a combined picture of how we want to work with organizations.
I hope what comes through in our book and also our practice is that, we don't just, put out these ideas as if, it's easy for people to assimilate them. It really takes work, and we're working on this stuff ourselves. And as soon as you work on one thing and you get that figured out, another thing is going to pop up, and fear can continue to be that cue for your learning and growth. And I think it's a lifelong process. So
absolutely,
we discovered that viscerally through the book writing process. Well,
I think the both of you, described some of the archetypes that are in the book. You described for both of you, the perfectionist's archetype. I would say both of you certainly had periods of time in your life where you were aspiring to that perfectionism thing, don't you think?
Yeah, I think perfectionism, certainly the competitor, and then for me, when the competitor is not working out very well, I may kind of slip into avoidance or, more of the likable, and so I think we all kind of slip into these fear-based patterns. And what we're trying to do is help people realize, look, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, a chance to step back and reflect for yourself about whether or not those patterns are really helping you be effective or not. And if they're not effective for you, then you have the ability to make those changes.
Right. And I think that's an excellent point. It's not about labeling anything good or bad. It's a matter of getting familiar with these things in a contextual way, so that when you recognize them, you can then kind of almost hold it out in front of you, almost outside of yourself, and say, is this serving me or not right now? And how do I take that and recognize what it is doing or not doing, and then decide what I'm going to do with it, right? But having that awareness and understanding how it works is it's really a gift to be able to understand that.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been tremendous. I would like to ask you one final question. Of course, everything will be in the show notes in terms of our audience having a way of knowing more about your work and how to find you. We have a lot of people who listen to this who are thinking about what's next. Where are they going next? Where do they want to work? What do they want their future work situation to look like? And they're anticipating making a transition. And sometimes, fear gets very wrapped up in that dynamic when you start thinking about making a change. What would be a key piece of advice that each of you might give somebody who is starting to consider making a career or a job transition?
Yeah, one bit of advice I would give. So any transition for many people, can be a bit scary. I think it will trigger some degree of fear because there's uncertainty.
Sure.
I would just encourage people to ask the question, what can the uncertainty or what can this new situation teach you? What's the opportunity or what's the gift, really, rather than focusing on all the downsides of the uncertainty, to focus on the upside and what you can learn. I think that question alone may lead you to a place that is unexpected and more satisfying than getting stuck just in the downside.
Yeah. Or what is it that I'm looking to learn? Right? Yeah.
So I will give you two perspectives. One is hindsight is 2020, and then the other one is when I was there 11 years ago making the decision, right? So from a hindsight is 2020, what I can tell you is, you know, it's never easy. Whether you're there or you're here, it's never easy, but it works itself out. It always works itself out. It leads to different choices and different trade-offs, but it works itself out. But as long as you're working and doing something that you are excited about, that allows you to live your purpose, you will always come out better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's the hindsight is 2020.
Right.
Now, when I was in that decision-making process, I'll tell you the three reasons I was able to make the transition. And I distinctly remember when I initially was thinking about it, my mother turned to me and said, Gaurav, are you crazy? You work at McKinsey and Company. You have two young children. What if your business does not work out? Right? And that is a lot of us, right? And what I had was the three things that I thought about was, one was, do I have support? And for me, which what was really important was that my wife was there for me, is my support system. And we did it together rather than it was just my decision.
Right. Yeah.
And that was really important. The second one was that I had some money in the bank for a period of 6 to 8 months where I could live even in uncertainty and even without making any money.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then the third one was just I had to work into myself, just that I believed enough in myself that I would make it work out. And if you don't believe in yourself, if you're not ready to, don't do it.
Right.
It takes a lot of self-belief.
Right. Right.
In fact, that's a Kabbalistic principle that belief is the mother of everything. And you have to really ask yourself, do you believe in yourself? Do you believe in the greater something that it will help you make happen and that people will show up to support you? Mm-hmm. And if you don't believe that, don't do this.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me of one of my former podcast guests who said, I'll always bet on myself.
Yeah.
I like that, the way she said that. I'll always bet on me.
And that's easier said than done, but that's what it takes.
Yeah.
That's what it takes.
Yeah. Well, I understand why your mother would have said that to you. A lot of our parents or grandparents lived during the Depression. They saw things very differently and they lived very differently. And I understand that fear that comes up. But I always, whenever I took a risk, I always thought, you know what? I know that if something doesn't work out, I'm not going to let myself starve or not have a roof over my head. I'm going to find a way to make ends meet if something doesn't work out. That's just not even a question. So
and Tammy, I carry with myself all the baggage of being an immigrant, right? Mm-hmm. And being in a foreign land in some ways and figuring it out.
Yeah.
And yet you have to transcend that in order to move forward.
Well, that's a big deal. I don't take that for granted. I mean, that's a very big deal. I want to thank both of you today for being here. This was really delightful. And I wish you well going forward into 2022.
Thanks, Tammy. Likewise.
Yeah, let's do it.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Gaurav Bhatnagar and Mark Minukas of Co-Creation Partners. It was so interesting to speak with them to learn about their personal and professional journeys. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on my website at tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 168. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my new book, Work from the Inside Out, break through 9 common obstacles, and design a career that fulfills you. It's available in print and ebook editions through my website, Amazon Worldwide, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. Just go ahead and make a request. If you were inspired by this episode with Gaurav and Mark, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And please do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find at my website, tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.